Welcome, friends. So I finally broke down and bought one of these super viral Coco Wyo, I think they're called, coloring books, and got Moments Volume 2. And we're going to open it up and see what all the hype is about.
All right, so I flipped through and found the first page that I thought I could kind of do something with, and it was this cute little pool page. Me, being the cheap person that I am, did not want to go buy the expensive alcohol markers that everybody uses on these. So in the past, I have colored with colored pencils and I go over it with a cheap water-based marker, and it still gives it that super nice smooth look without the expensive cost of the alcohol marker. So I thought I was going to be very clever and give you guys this great pro tip about using just Crayola brand products. I was very wrong. I started off with the small areas, just using these super cheap Crayola washable markers, and they were not very good. I thought that the smaller the area was, it wouldn't look so streaky. You could still kind of see the streaks. And my understanding is that the whole purpose of alcohol-based markers is that it's nice and smooth. Well, then I drew the pool water with just colored pencil, and I was going to go over it with my cheap markers because that has worked in the past with other water-based markers. But Crayola is especially cheap. I didn't realize how just cheap quality their markers are. And so when I went over it with my marker, somehow it still ended up being pretty streaky. So I was already through it at this point and just thought I would try to suffer through and see if I could make it work. I drew over my tiles with this teal colored pencil and again went over it with my teal marker and just kind of rubbed it out with my finger, and it kind of worked okay to give it a little bit more of a solid tone. So it wasn't a complete loss, but the truth is, if you're going to do this with any kind of regularity, you do need the alcohol markers because at least the cheap Crayola markers are just not going to work. Doing the colored pencil is fine, but part of the appeal of these coloring books is that you can do them so quickly. And if you're using colored pencils, it's going to slow you down. So you try to make the markers work. I thought if I let it dry and then go over it with a second coat, it would take care of some of the streakiness. And that did kind of work a little bit. So you can use cheap Crayola markers on there. It's not going to look as good. But if you just are patient, let it dry and do a second coat, I mean, it doesn't look too bad. I guess it depends on how serious you are. If it's just like a little hobby and nothing too serious, then I mean, Crayola's fine. However, the gray marker, it felt like it was almost dried out the minute I started working with it. You could see just how incredibly streaky it is. I had to go over it like 3 times to get any kind of solid color out of it. I was really surprised. It felt like those cheap markers you used to get in those coloring sets whenever you were a kid, and like they work for like a single object and then they're instantly useless. That surprised me with Crayola. I thought their colors would last a lot longer because they're like the #1 art brand for kids. And I have to say, I don't know why there's a cat in the pool. This looks like a public pool. It doesn't look like a private pool. It looks like a public pool, and there's a cat in there. That seems odd and out of place. Am I the only one who thinks that it's weird for a cat to be in a pool? If I was in a public pool and there was a cat roaming around, I would feel like it was slightly unsanitary. Any animal, for that matter, in a pool room. Outside of a service animal, that would be weird. And cats hate water on top of that, so that just struck me as a little odd. One thing I'm kind of surprised with these Coco Wyo coloring books is the eyeballs are just little dots. With this kind of like really cutesy style, you would think that there would be like these overly large, adorable eyeballs instead of these little tiny dots. It still looks good, it still looks cute, it just kind of surprised me. So the highlighting was new for me because I've never done anything like this before, and I didn't quite get them right. I think they look okay, but doing the highlights with paint markers was new for me, and trying to figure out where to put them felt a little different because I'm used to doing shading and not highlighting, so that was a change of pace. So once I was done with this, you could absolutely leave this here if you want, but me being who I am had to alter this here. I decided we're gonna add a sea monster or a water monster, whatever, some kind of monster coming out of this pool. So I gave her gaping eyes, her and the cat both, and threw these tentacles coming up out of the water to come and get her. It was so fun. I was really surprised that the marker bled through the paint so bad. Like, the paint markers went over the colored pencil area with no hitch. Any place there was those water-based markers, they really bled through the paint. And I was surprised by that. And I had to add several coats, and it still kind of showed through a little bit. So for that reason, for the purpose of what I do, I'm probably gonna stick with the colored pencils because it's easier to get the paint marker to work over the colored pencil than it is to get it to work over marker. I drew the hair on the cat standing up, so I modified that just a hair and drew the tentacles. And I should have stopped after I outlined the tentacles in Sharpie, but I made the mistake of trying to outline all the little suction cups in black as well because I thought it would look more cohesive, and that was a mistake, so then I had to fight with that to fix it. So if I had left it at this point, it would have looked great, but I ruined it. Here's my finished product. Still very fun. I mean, a monster coming up out of the pool. I mean, how can you beat that? So the second piece was definitely my favorite. I started off pretty simple. Learned my lesson from the last one, so we're just doing colored pencil, nothing else on this. I colored in the grass with a nice dark green and then a super light green on the edges. Basic browns for the table and wainscoting. The color scheme, I wanted to do this teal and yellow, and I think that she's sitting on like some kind of bench seat. It's kind of hard to tell because it's not really a chair, and it doesn't really look like a restaurant bench. So I'm thinking this is a woman at her house, maybe? The chair looked like it was connected to some kind of bench, so I kept it all the same color. Some things I don't like about this coloring book: the paper quality is really poor. When you're coloring, at least with colored pencils, the colored pencil doesn't absorb into the paper. It's like the texture's not quite rough enough, and so you end up with these little tiny flakes everywhere, and like my yellow pillow, there was some dingy flecks from the teal that got into the pillow when I tried to brush it away. So the paper quality is really not very good. You have to push really hard. I'm using some cheap colored pencils. I could not bring myself to use my Prisma colored pencils on something like this, so I'm just using some like Amazon Basics and Castle colored pencils, some just cheap stuff. It definitely was pretty waxy altogether. this one, after I was done, I did take a water-based marker and go over the colored pencil to fill in any of the little tiny white dots, white spaces that couldn't quite get the color in there, and it looked way better than when I used the Crayola brand. So the method does work if you don't want to buy alcohol markers. If you have a water-based marker, it will work. Just probably don't use Crayola brand. And you could absolutely leave the page at this point. You don't have to take it any further, but I had to because I am who I am. And my idea was to have the plane dropping bombs on the Eiffel Tower with her eyes bugging out of her head like those old school cartoons, Acme cartoons where the eyes bug out of their head. And it was really fun. Now this is just fun. I do not think violence is good in any way, but this is just fun, and I didn't pick Paris. The coloring page picked Paris for me. For this last one, it's just this cute little island scene, and I did what I did with my other pages. I colored in all of my flowers and everything with my colored pencils. I went over it with a water-based marker that was cheap, so I wouldn't have to spend the money on the alcohol markers to give it the nice, smooth finish without the alcohol marker cost. Was so very happy with it. I remember in art class when I was a kid, one of my favorite things to do was our art teacher would have this big piece of like poster board, draw a bunch of random lines and random squiggles on it, and then you had to turn it into something based on what you saw. And that was always one of my favorite things to do. Probably the best thing about these coloring pages is how quickly you can get them done. I'm used to spending just a lot of time on each and every coloring page, and to get these done so quickly, I could do 3 of these in one day, which is just huge. That is something that I definitely like about these coloring pages, just how much you can get done in such a short amount of time. Of course, at the end, I had to modify it, and I changed her face orientation to be looking out into the distance to a volcano that was erupting and the little kid hearing the volcano erupting with a grimace, and I turned the cloud into a smoke plume.
Well, there you have it, friends. So that was my introduction into these Coco Wyo coloring books, and I can definitely see what the appeal is. So it's not something I would usually go for. It's really simple, overly cutesy, but I like how cartoony it is. So if you're wanting to like dig into some more cartoon style or maybe more nostalgic, like little kid vibes, I kind of like that. Like, oh my goodness, this was so fun, and they didn't take me very long. I could get like through 3 of these in a single day. Well, anyway, make sure you like, comment, subscribe. I feel like I could add like some Looney Tunes in here or something. That would be fun. I have an idea. Alright, tune into my next video because I've got an idea.